CAPSI podcast series. CAPSI, building a culture of effective giving and corporate social responsibility.
Welcome to another episode of our conversations on African philanthropy and social investment with me, Bhekinkosi Moyo, the Director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment. I really don't know where to start with this one. I'm joined today by Sibongile Mkhabela, who is currently working with the Barloworld Foundation. The reason why I said I don't know where to start with this one, Sibongile.
Yeah.
First, let me welcome you.
Thank you.
Welcome. I really don't know where to start because you and I have been on this journey on African philanthropy for years and years.
Yeah.
And reading your profile, it starts with you at the Barloworld Foundation. But actually, I want us to start way, way back in the beginning. When did the philanthropy bug catch you?
Becky, I actually wouldn't understand what you mean when you talk about the philanthropy bug, because that's a term I picked up much later in my life, you know. So I don't know at what point it becomes a philanthropic bug. I know when a political bug hits me, and that political bug, because it came from a particular way of thinking, and it comes primarily from the Black consciousness philosophy and self-sustaining and dignity and maintaining the self and self-regard and all those things about who you are, not only as a person, who you are as a person, but who you are as a people. And therefore, my philanthropy bug probably is more influenced by that philosophy. As, you know, how do you get to a point where people can direct their own development, can do what they want to do with their lives, you know? So it's not an academic bug.
Yeah.
It's a bug that was really organic in my growth, my development,
Yeah, so the reason why I started there is because profiles have a way of not saying much. But let me do the formal stuff now and read what your profile is saying.
Oh no, don't read all of that. I actually asked the office to send me 5 lines.
Yeah.
I know they didn't. I don't know.
It's fine. And then we can now delve deeper into this. So Sibongile Mkhabela is a social worker by profession and a passionate social activist by orientation, currently spearheading the newly formed independent Barloworld Empowerment Foundation in the capacity of Chief Executive Director. But prior to this, you were also the Chief Executive Director of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, and you also spearheaded the formation and development of the hospital. We'll talk about that. But I just wanted to get a sense so that people get to know what is behind you. Who is Sibongile Mkhabela? If we could go as far back as you can in terms of your upbringing, the values that you subscribed to, the people that surrounded you, to the point where you could begin identifying who you are.
Wow. That's a long story. It depends
Indeed.
how much time you've
Indeed.
got. It's a long story. I'm really a girl who grows up in Soweto. That's my home. In Zola in particular. Now, if you know Soweto, you will know that Zola is said to be the Wild West. So I don't grow up with... I grow up with a lot of demands from yourself as a person. And I go to schools at a time where schooling was about forming who you become. So, you know, I'm influenced by teachers who had an interest in who we became, not only in what exams we passed, but who we became as people, which comes to, you know, the values that you would have. And as I said earlier, you know, very early on, I caught the bug of self-reliance, and that bug never left me. It bit me when I was a kid, you know, starting your political kind of life, and just your life, and the kinds And I would also say, if I'm defining myself, I'm a product of a people that cared, and a people that invested in its children. And it's been a wonder to watch people who invest in their children, who invest whatever they have. They're not seen as investing. It's just bringing up your children. The unfortunate part is often they do not benefit from this. They don't draw the dividends. Many of us, it could possibly be you, if you were one of those kids, but many of us are brought up by people who didn't have much. And we were the hope of that generation and those people. It becomes unfortunate that as we get older, as we get into professions, we speak more from across the fence. We speak from the other, and we refer to our own and ourselves, differently. We begin to see and to hear languages that are not very helpful. The language which I resent the most, the poorest of the poor. And we're referring to our mothers and fathers and uncles. And for me, I think it's sensitive because every time I utter it, I think about, hey, this is my family. I'm not talking about faceless people. They have lives. And you defining people purely by their socioeconomic status does not do justice. To the people you're talking to. So I come from wrestling with those issues quite earlier on. This is at high school. So it's very early in my development. And my journey in life is not, I would imagine, like every other journey, is never a straight line.
Yeah.
It's full of, turns and twists. So I finished university long after I started working, long after I started doing a number of things, because just how my life had gone.
Yeah, and so just before we came on set, we were talking with Maurice, and jokingly,
Yes.
a statement was made around, that if you want to know about 1976, we speak to you, and most of the people around here were not yet born. I want us to unpack some statement here that says your first steps as an activist were intuitive rather than political. Can we unpack this statement that says your first steps as an activist were intuitive rather than political? And I'm asking this in the context of your experiences in the 1976 uprising.
Yeah, I think intuitive in that, there's something. People join political organizations and they want to be politicians. I've never wanted to be a politician. I never quite wanted to join a political organization. They're intuitive in that it's informed by your life experiences, what you see, what you experience, what you go through. And as I said, when you look at the generation of people who grow up in the 70s are people who come from communities that care. And what I mean by that is not that they care because they feed you, but they care because they care about how you begin to think about the world. So by the age of 11, I was part of the women's Christian movement. And that is because they cared about children. And in caring about children, they taught us to love books, to love to read, but to also love facts and to love to debate. And in the schools you go to, as you debate issues, because of the consciousness at the time, political consciousness, your teachers would be most likely be teaching you more about the continent and the challenges of the continent, about how we end up where we are as a colonized nation. So it becomes something that's in you. It's not something, I can't resign it. It defines who I am, in that it's shaped how I look at the world and how I see the world.
Yeah, as one of probably the driving forces behind the uprisings of 1976, every year when we celebrate 2016, what are your thoughts, especially when you look back and you put into context where the country is today and the kind of challenges that we still face, what are your thoughts as one of the people who was heavily involved? Of course, at that point, you might have been fighting one particular enemy, and today we've got several of them. And I always, look back and see the kind of celebrations or the kind of commemorations that we do on June 16 and wonder whether those that were heavily involved have the same, I would say, the same take on what we are doing today compared to what they went through.
Bheki, I think you probably get the same, feeling and sense that whilst we want to say today's politics are about multiple issues, they've always been about multiple issues. They've always been about education, about health, about this and about that. All of these things, and maybe what helped is that you knew who the enemy was.
Yeah.
And the enemy was all over these things in all these aspects of your lives. We're facing exactly the same thing. Because if we, as a country, people say you get the government you deserve. If we can begin to want to get more for ourselves, we would probably change the government. We would probably hold our government more accountable on all those issues that we want to now compartmentalize as single issues, and they're not single issues. All those issues are connected, and they're connected to how we are governed and what's the vision. I'm also a Christian, and I like the scripture that says, where there is no vision, people perish.
Yeah.
Not when there is no food, not when there is no money, but when there is no vision. And this is where we are today. What led us in the 70s, at least being part of that, was the vision, was someone putting before us what we could become as African children, was something to aspire to. You woke up every day with something, with an aspiration, with a bigger you than you were, even though I suppose economically you would say you come poor and all of that, but it didn't define us. So I think that if I look at the country today, it saddens me, and what saddens me is what I strongly believe in. I started with self-reliance, that it starts with us. Agency is with us, with each and every one of us. And whilst the problems we face are multiple and they are intricate and they are complex, however, if we decided to hold accountable those that we elect and we directed the agenda, then we can direct the economic agenda, education agenda, health agenda, all of it towards what we want for our children. Even inside apartheid, with all its ills, my parents and their peers and the leaders of South Africa at the time had decided what they want for the African child. And I'm a product of that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think the country is quite decided that, and I think we easily get derailed by how many the problems are. There were always many. At some point I was working with the women's movement. At some point I was working with the economic issues, women and the economy. It's not new. It's been there all the time.
Yeah.
We didn't sit and wake up every day to fight apartheid. Whilst we did, we were also fighting all the little struggles around us. But we're fighting them from a particular viewpoint, a particular way of thinking, which I think at this point, we're so derailed that even the labor movement, which was born during the 60s, the 70s, even earlier, Boma Mashinini are much earlier starting the labor movement. But they start the labor movement to restore the dignity of workers and dignity of our people, even within apartheid. I think it's quite sad that when we go back, and for us to know who we are, we have to always be able to cast back and see who we've been. And I think we've lost that. I think the celebrations are very much a cover-up. South Africa suffers from a covered-up attitude for history. We're not bold to say what we mean. and stick to it.
Yeah.
We have very few things, if any, that you would say is non-negotiable. And every country would start. You know, when Nyerere started those many years ago, it was non-negotiable that there would be education for all. Quality education.
Yeah.
Now, we might say, we don't even say it's non-negotiable that every child goes to school. You know, the laws say so, but hey, you know, if there are children who don't go to school, you know, we're just very laid back about everything. And it's got to do with how we are governed, and it's got to do with how citizens have abdicated their role as citizens.
Yeah. And of course, even during that period in the 80s, 70s, and so forth, one would still say there was a role that philanthropy played. And I'm not talking about international philanthropy. I'm talking about our own version of solidarity and all of that. So, because we normally lose that and focus on, you know, what international actors were contributing towards the struggle to dismantle apartheid.
Yes.
But actually, we have our own philanthropy that was at play. I want us to go there and talk about those different forms that you yourself, as one of the actors, was drawing upon as part of this philanthropy that we are championing today.
Bheki, let me use this. Let me say, you know, you have Inanda seminary schools. You have Ohlange schools. Who built the schools? Individuals. Mafuzela Wodum. You would have called him a philanthropist today.
Yeah.
But Mafuzela Wodum, looking at education at that time, decided we are building an institution for our children to learn. And it became one of the star schools. Inanda Seminary. So many other people went to Inanda Seminary. We have so many schools. That was even, the birth of those is even before my time. And in my time, we have, in health, you have Steve Biko. Not only Steve Biko was talking about Black consciousness philosophy, he was also saying, how does it translate? And what does it mean? And I think the linking of philanthropy with philosophies that drive it. What are the philosophies?
Yeah.
And I think we can easily sometimes look at philanthropy as advanced and sophisticated charity that's for certain people. But really, if we look at Zanembilo was an health program that was built by Steve Biko and his colleagues, Rampela being one of the people who built Zanembilo. And in every village, there would be clinics where our doctors would administer health at no cost. Many of the doctors that we had were private healthcare doctors, dedicated time to attend to those who could not access proper health. And when the healthcare system was failing, our doctors propped up that system, ensuring our people don't fall. But it had to do with, why do we do what we do? We don't do it because the other is suffering. We do it because we as a people are going to go down if we don't deal with this. So you have healthcare, you have Zanembilo coming up, you have so many programs and so many newspapers and news magazines which were driven by people using their own money. All the doctors who participated in Zanembilo were using their own money. There would be doctors who even the Afrikaners had to admit that these are people doctors. The people's doctor, they called Dr. Abu Asfat, because Dr. Abu Asfat had times where he did nothing else but went into the informal settlements and worked with the poorest amongst those who were in those communities, in those informal communities. And he worked with the children and ensured immunization of children. So when you're looking at us in the 70s without much, I'm not talking about people who were receiving aid. This is long before the fashionable aid came in. This is the time when you thought about a program, you went around to collect money for it. And you did not think, because we are collecting for it, we're going to keep it small. You made it, as Zanempilo was, as big as possible. And Zanempilo was only destroyed when the system, when the apartheid state realized that there was a bottom-up movement coming up. And this movement, if you like, in today's word, you'll call it philanthropic, if you like. Yeah. But this movement was an awakening of people, and they were awakened to say, you can do it. You are capable. And so the ideas of self-reliance were coming bottom-up, because whilst the way, the SASO organizations and BPC were looking at big political issues, you also had Black people's programs. And Black people's programs were exactly that, were philanthropic organizations initiated by people for themselves in order to uplift the standard of living of our people, and many bursaries and bursary schemes. And many of us were products of teachers who, after school, conducted other classes to ensure that we passed in school. So when you look at, the system of philanthropy tends to come from a very capitalistic mentality and thinking. And therefore it comes with, when I have made it, I will then make donations for those who have not made it. The problem with that money is that there is no money that is value neutral. It comes laden with its own values. And it wants to direct where people are going to be going and how they're going to be going there. What's different here is when people rise and collect their own monies and mobilize themselves and organize themselves. And as I said, not only to do small community, what we call today the CBOs, and then there's the NGO who is kind of the big brother to the CBO, and then there's the philanthropist who's the big guy in the room. You can almost see the capitalist system playing itself out, and the class system playing itself out, even as we look at development. So if you're looking, however, if you begin to look at philanthropy from a philosophy of a people that says we can rise and we are capable and we can do this. So when you come to at the table, you come to us and we are on the same level. You're not telling us what education needs to be, what health needs to look like, what are the health outcomes going to look like. We're going to tell you what health outcomes we want for our children. But in many instances, when the philanthropist comes to us now with big monies, they have long decided what their agenda is. And most of us spend our time just following that agenda. So, part of my work at the Children's Fund, my preoccupation, and probably the reason I stayed for so long at the Children's Fund, was the fact that it gave me an opportunity to build significant sustainability of an institution that is African, based on monies we could collect in the continent, especially monies we collected in South Africa, so that the citizens of this country participated in building that. And for me, that it was important to begin to look at our own Ford foundations. We've been, staff, bureaucrats of these foundations. And I strongly felt, and probably goes with my political, philosophical thinking, that up until we have foundations that are driven by us, with monies that no one's going to give you money to do what you want to do. Everyone's going to give you money to do what they want you to do. So for me, that's, And I derail you a little bit.
Actually, it's a good.
There's so much.
It's a good segue. It's a good segue to what I want us to talk about. I knew we were going to have this masterclass, so it's given.
Excuse me.
I'm making you choke now.
You're making me choke. I've been in this too long, baby.
So I knew that we were going to have this masterclass, and this is the reason why we wanted to have a conversation with you, because a lot of us come into the philanthropy space with this capitalist interpretation of what philanthropy is. And we actually relegate or even look down on the other interpretation, which is exactly what African philanthropy is about. And for me, at CAPSI, if we could get more and more of these interpretations, which takes me to one question before we move to your time at the at the foundation. So where are these narratives in terms of records, documentation?
There's very little and there's a lot.
Yeah.
And there's very little because, those who came, one, the apartheid government was very strategic. And they understood what to kill and what to let live. Steve Biko had to die. He had to die because his ideas were too big.
Yeah.
So Bukwe had to die. He had to die because, again, his ideas were too big. So those who have threatened not only the system physically, but threatened it mentally, we've sacrificed, or at least they've been sacrificed in our lives. So if the apartheid government was good at anything, one thing it was good at was banning of literature, taking books from many of us where they raided our homes and they would take everything you've written. So many things that have been taken out of our hands and we don't know where they are. And we've had a great deal of academics who have not bothered to really say, where was the literature that was taken out of Khotso House? Where's literature that's taken out of SASO BPC when the state banned organization in 1979, October 1979, and they banned all the organizations they felt were threatening. They also took every piece of paper. And at that time, everything was on paper.
Yeah.
It would have been better now because maybe some of it would have been on the cloud. But most of it was. I don't think it's. I think a lot of it has been deleted and a lot of it has been banned. But I think there must still be. We're just not a curious people.
Yeah.
We're not a searching people, and we're not looking far enough to find some of these things.
Yeah.
But the advantage we have is that we are also oral people.
Yeah.
And so we still have people amongst us who can tell these stories. Many of them are, there's less and less of them. But the reality is they're still there. So if you find, those who are interested in knowledge and knowledge gathering could begin to gather some of these amazing stories. The stories of Mama Kuzwai need to be gathered, and I think University of Johannesburg has done something around Mama Kuzwai.
Yeah.
And maybe other universities are going to do more around not only the individual leader, but the times. Because, because I come out of the 1976 kind of grouping, I often have to deal with, we were not a miracle. We were not a miracle generation.
Mm-hmm.
We were a product of people who wanted us to come out in a particular way, and we came out that way.
Yeah.
We, despite Bantu education, we became what the community wanted us to become.
Yeah, yeah. So we might have some opportunities here because of, we're getting students now doing masters and PhDs to actually, encourage them to do some of this research into the past, but with the view of really positioning the different expressions of philanthropy in the African setting. Which is
going to be difficult because also, you've got a government that's not quite ready to admit that they didn't free anybody, that we freed ourselves. So you need to have group of students who can listen to different narratives and different stories.
And find ways of interpreting them
very
well.
Exactly.
So most of us, including myself, we came to know you or about you when you were at the helm of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. But how did you end up there? What propelled you? I know at some point you were in government, you were in the UN, but what propelled you to the philanthropic sector, particularly to the Children's Fund?
Well, I was in government at the time, and frankly, I just wanted the freedom of being in a civil society space again. I think government and I we were finding it difficult to live together. We did. And we did a lot of things because in the time I was also because I had achieved what I wanted to achieve within government. And for me, it was, the establishment of the National Development Agency, which was important. And the thinking at the time was you needed to keep grassroots organizations alive. And you needed to keep them vibrant. Remember, we're coming from a time where we had, I think I was part of the Development Resources Center, and when we calculated 1993, 94, the study threw up about 40,000 NGOs, CBOs, and all of that. So for us, it was important that we keep these vibrant, because we figured, and we're right, that any government would be as strong as its civil society. That if civil society loses its strength and its hold, any government will begin to do what governments would want to do. They will start to dominate. They will start to put in policies that are not people pro-people, and that the only counter. That now we're going to have what you have today. You have a strong business and strong government, but you have a very weakened civil society. So you really have deals between business and government. So when I was finished with that work, when the legislation for National Development Agency was passed, I championed that through Parliament, and we got it passed. I said to my boss at the time, Frank Chikane, I think my job is done.
Yeah.
And at that time, Thabo Mbeki was going to be the president. So he thought I was absolutely out of my mind. Like, this is going to be the most powerful office. It's already the most powerful office. Where else would we want to be? And interestingly, actually, that's not me. It's not something I'm interested in. It's not power that I'm looking for. I'm looking for a place where I can make a difference. And the Children's Fund was interesting because, one, I had an interest in children. Even within the government, within the Thabo Mbeki's office, part of my responsibilities were children and policies around children. So I wanted to focus on children. But the second thing that fascinated me was an opportunity to be in control of resources and allocation of resources. And at that time, that's probably the main thing that I wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I was going to be working with Ahmad Dango, who, of course, had been with Kagiso Trust, and I wanted to learn from him. So I wanted to continue learning. So that lands me in the Children's Fund. And as I'm there, I see the opportunity. I read up how it was put together. I read up how Mandela was not a rich man when he set up the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. He was not a rich man. He was a prisoner coming out of prison. And he decided on the Children's Fund. That was one of the first things he did as a president. He had committed to doing that.
Yeah.
But what he does, he brings together people who would be interested in putting their monies with his. He dedicates a third of his salary for the duration of his presidency to the Children's Fund. So he dedicates it such that it's a stop order.
Yeah.
It goes straight to the Children's Fund, a third of his income. And he challenges business, he challenges other people with money to do the same. So they match what he's done.
Yeah.
So when I looked at this pot, my job was, so we can do with this money whatever we choose to do. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the idea.
Yeah, the freedom.
I like the freedom. I'm like, this is good. This is good. We can do whatever we want to do.
Yeah.
So long as it remains children, it serves children. But then I beginning to think, but we can also grow it.
Yeah.
We can grow it so that it serves generations of children we've never met and that we will never meet. But it says, as this generation of leadership of people today, we have cast our eye far enough to cater for those who will come long after us. So it becomes almost an obsession to what level of endowment do we need to say an organization is sustainable. And we do all kinds of calculations. I must have driven my finance teams absolutely nuts with the question, if we don't get another penny, how much do we need to have in the kitty? For how long? So the measuring of this organization, it can live for 3 years, it can live for 4 years. I'm aiming for it can live into perpetuity. That's really what I'm trying to get at. So I'm starting at 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. But of course, if the question is, if we don't get any more money from other donors, then it's intended in strategies over the years. We change strategies. Sometimes we have strategies where we say, okay, we need to buy 2 more years into the future. If that's what we need to buy, then we need to spend even less of our money, but continue to grow the kitty and grow our spend on the ground, because we can't just hold it. So we need to find money that can match whatever money we put on the table. So we go out, we're aggressive about fundraising. We're aggressive about, you know, like any good fundraiser knows, non-designated funding is you know, you're in Southern Africa Trust, so you know, you go in there hoping for non-designated funding. You can spend it however you want, even if it might be limited in terms of type. So you're looking for money, and you're also looking for committed monies, because you also build a team that can, it's a technical team, that can render the services that others are looking for. What that does, it helps us to release our money and use other monies and keep our presence on you know, out there. So you can hear that was my passion and my obsession.
In fact, the reason why I'm excited about that is that, you know, you were one of the very first few groups in the continent to actually build an endowment. And institutions are still struggling to actually have an endowment. As we speak right now, our own institution, the school, does not have an endowment. We are beginning to think about it right now. Maybe you've said a bit about it, but how successful were you? And, you know, if others want to do the same, what are the things that they need to know? What are the steps, in a way?
I don't know.
You were doing as you were going.
My team just thought I was mad. I'm sure. I remember one of our managers at some point just said, I know you're going to hate what I'm going to say, but I really don't understand why you're obsessed with this fundraising. We have enough money. Why do you want us to raise more money? You know? And so I can't tell you the steps. And I think I celebrate the board we had, because it embraced that vision. You know, I can't give myself credit that I started the endowment, but they already had the principles around reserves. And they had discipline around reserves. So we needed to develop more policies around, okay, now we need reserves are accessible. But if we make that an endowment that's not accessible, so when Peggy's feeling a little bit down and there's a colleague coming, he doesn't say, you know, we've got that state fund. It's not a state fund. It's money that's saved for a purpose. So how successful? I think it was painful success. I don't think it was easy. It was painful for the staff and the team, and I still want to thank them, because many of them just, you know, followed. But huge sacrifices had to be made. Containing our spend was a priority for me. Containing how much we spent for ourselves and increasing what we do out there was very important. It also part of the success, the way I thought it would happen, and on this one, we haven't been that successful, was to replicate the model at community level as we went. Because it would be one thing to have a powerful foundation at the top. But what I really wanted was, for every rand we spent on the ground, we saved a rand. So, you know, some donors, I spoke to some donors that, look, part of our exit plan has to be, what do we leave behind? And there are a number of ways you can answer the question, what you leave behind. You know, technical people can come and give you fancy and sophisticated M&Es with, you know, we came when it was, the community was here, look at where it is today. But I wanted this community, and the community approach we took was, the capacity we wanted the community was yes, capacity to run organizations, but the most important capacity was systemic, was a community that could rise and respond to challenges it had never seen before. You know, and top of that, we then had HIV/AIDS to deal with, which, one, we didn't know what it was and the impact it's going to have, but more importantly, we didn't know what burden we would carry for the next 30 years. We still haven't really captured the burden of HIV/AIDS that we've carried, despite antiretrovirals that we've carried. So in building the endowment, from the Children's Fund point of view, we did well. And the community, from the sustainability of programming, we did well. We did well. But from the sustainability of pockets and pots of money at community level for people to decide, we didn't reach there. And maybe then, and if someone else has an appetite for it, someone else can pursue that vision. But I say we did well because just in terms of numbers, when we started, we were just below, maybe speak in international currency, I would say we're just below $10 million US.
Yeah.
Just below $10 million US. It took many years, but by the time I left, which was 20 years later, it's a long time, we were just under, 1 billion, 100 million. We're just under 100 million. And under 100 million having spent from that endowment, 300 million for the hospital, and having raised R1 billion for the hospital.
For the hospital, yeah. So, one of the principles is you don't spend on the initial capital.
No.
You actually spend on the profits, so to
Absolutely.
speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you still invest some of those profits.
Right,
so the policy for us was to spend 60% of what we would call profits, for lack of a better word, and reinvest 40%. So that you continue to grow. But you also continue to have non-designated funding, which you also put into endowment on ongoing basis.
There are very
so
few
fundraising machinery remains alive.
There are very few organizations in this continent that can claim to have raised that kind of money. I can tell you that there are very few. In fact, you might be the only foundation that has raised that kind of money, which puts you in the league of the Harvard school, Harvard University, with their biggest endowment that is normally talked about. So I just want to recognize that, because I don't think people know that you've gone to that extent to raising such big money.
Thank you.
And so that's the one part, the endowment. But I know that you also were raising money from international donors as well.
Oh, yeah.
And we were speaking about some of the challenges around what donors already have as some kind of an agenda that they want to accomplish. Yeah. And given where you were coming from and the philosophy that you embodied, I want us to talk a bit about how you tackled that, because there are a lot of leaders in the NPO sector, and I was one of them. We struggle with that, simply because I think because there's money available.
Yes.
How do you put your philosophies across forcefully without losing the funding that is put on your? So I just want us to have a conversation around how you navigated that so well.
You say so well. I'm not so sure. It's always so well. We lost a few friends and a few donors, and we won a few converts in the process. You're reminding me, when I first came to the Children's Fund, I didn't come in as CEO. I came in as a program manager, a program director. And one of the things that I immediately wanted us to shift, not just me, but the team wanted us to shift, was the image of the African child. Just the image of the African child. You would say, every organization has an image of an African child. I won't name them, I might insult people. But you might know that when you see a distended tummy, a begging bowl, standing in a queue for food, you know who's that. You know which organization is that. So there are all kinds of African children. You see a fly around the face, you see a dirty face, and only later did I realize that all those pictures actually were created to look exactly like that. It wasn't a picture like that, it was created to look like that. But it's created to look like that because they've decided that's the child they want. So we had to start with, when you say the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, who's our child? And we had to define this is a child with great aspiration. They might be hungry, they might be in trouble, they might be vulnerable, but they have a human spirit that thrives and that wants to thrive. So when you look at our pictures, so that was the first struggle with donors. Because when they first looked at our pictures, they're like, these don't look very struggling children. I said, no, they're not. They're just average child. Stop a child in the street, any child. And capture that face. And that's all we've done. We have not manipulated anything. We've just created images of children that best represent the continent and the country and how we think about our children. So that was the first struggle. I remember presenting to some really serious donors, and there was a big pushback. And it's interesting that the pushback was around the image is wrong. It will not sell. You know that thing? This doesn't sell. We need to sell our pain. We need to sell our suffering. We need to sell our worst for money to come in. So philosophically, we had to position ourselves in that way. We also had to position ourselves where we say a child is always in the context of his family and community. So in many of our work, and it's very hard for donors, I might not tell you how many children I touched. I might not tell you that, because the systemic change has to happen at community, at institutional, at family. And once families can hold their children, I can trust them with any child, and whatever number of children. So you might find me spending a lot of time building women's organizations, working with women's groups, there was a program that we did that did home-based early childhood. And home-based early childhood literally took 20 homesteads and put them together, and they would rotate in terms of where the education is happening. But what was happening there was they were doing education in terms of stimulation of the little ones, but at the same time they were doing what is hunger, what is food security, how are we going to secure these 20 families in this community. So our approach was different, and it was intentionally different. And some donors liked it, others resisted. There was one donor whose money part of it we had to return. And that was the hardest moment, was when I had to sign a check and return money. And it was around a philosophical difference. The donor wanted to know how many children, count them, audit them, have you touched? And this was during the HIV and AIDS, and we're saying, but how do you go into a family and say, we want to audit your children and still restore dignity and retain sense of dignity of that family? We don't want the family to know that they can feed the children because we intervened. They must see themselves being able to feed the children. So I might intervene. I'm not bringing in food parcels. I'm enabling the family to secure itself. And so when I'm looking at the beneficiaries, they will vary in age. And the donors, they literally sent a group of people who called themselves auditors, and they were going to audit the numbers of children in each household. And where they were not satisfied, but there was a 19-year-old, they would then take the 19-year-old off. And they say, can we do the program again now using the money that's still left? I said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Ways.
No ways. What's the point of it? The cost, money comes into the bank, what you don't see is the cost. And the cost is where it matters most, where you've taken people, you've stripped people of their dignity and sense of self, and worse still, you haven't built anything sustainable. And for me, we're saying, and I was very excited one time when Matriculant approached one of our team members, I think it was Shadi, and said, you don't remember me? I was in the program in the Northern Cape, in Guruman. I was one of the children, I was 5 at the time. And you guys worked with my mom at our household. And my results have remained excellent ever since. Because we're saying, okay, we will intervene when the child is 3, 4, 5. The impact of that must be seen when they exit school as confident, people when they exit the system.
This reminds me, in one of the platforms, I think this was at the EGAC conference, you spoke about one of the programs where I suspect, if I'm still right, you expected to take a narrow approach around that, and expected to discard some of the traditional, I would say, activities, for example, that needed to be performed in order to be holistic. I want us to revisit that, because I found it fascinating about that, because donors would not get it, but you were able to have that holistic approach.
Yeah. You see, in is it Maelstrom? People were saying, and the general understanding was, Africans isolate people children whose parents died of HIV and AIDS. There's a stigma around it. And came an organization that said to us, we actually want to test that. We want to test where that's come, the validity of that. And when they came, and they wanted to partner with us. And when they came back, they said, what we come to conclude is the reason the children are stigmatized, it's true they're stigmatized, is because the cleansing has not been done. Now, which donor is going to give me money to cleanse, to cleansing ceremonies?
to buy in paper.
What are you talking about? They're going to wash them, they're going to buy them soap. It's like, no, we're going to find the uncles and the aunts who left the children when they didn't conduct and complete what they needed to complete according to culture. We're going to get them and say, for your family, what would it take? I promise you, there were those who said, well, we need just water and some herbs and cleansing of the children. Auntie, will you do it? Yes. What would it cost you to do it? This is what's going to cost. What do you have? This is what I have. So we augment that and we do. So we ended up actually slaughtering a few goats and some chickens. But that's what was required for reintegration of the children. Now, you could reintegrate in that way, understanding what are the real issues here. Or you could reintegrate by many workshops and, the usual lecturing, don't destigmatize, and, you had number of donors were giving money to deal with stigma, so people who have no money are workshopped, are workshopped. It's such a pity. So you would either have the workshops or you would have sessions with families, tracing and finding who's your aunt, who's your uncle, who's supposed to do this, because it's not everyone who can do it. Where are they? Find them wherever they are. Get them back with the children. Invite the community, do what needs to be done, and reintegrate children into communities. Crazy, but hey, we're an African organization.
Right.
We had to practice as an African organization.
There's a lot and so many themes to cover, and we don't have all the time. Definitely. But you then get yourself busy again with the children's hospital.
Peggy, that's a story for another day.
I know, but just the synopsis. We have you here. We can't live without you talking about that, because again, that was a huge commitment, but an engagement for you.
It was. The children's hospital, I must say first, it starts it's triggered by a personal tragedy when I lost my son. And in the process of being with my son when he was ill, I was engaging for the first time with pediatricians. I was understanding the world of children from those who care for them when they are sick. One of the things when my child got into an accident, I just said, take him to a children's hospital. And they said, ma'am, we can't fly him to Cape Town. I said, but why would we fly to Cape Town? What the hell? There must be a place. And they said, there isn't. There isn't a place. So that personally took me through a journey, a deep journey, a spiritual journey. And And of course, Tata Mandela was with us. But as we're doing that, you begin to analyze the system and what is wrong. And out of that, we had long conversations with many doctors. And it was clear that if it's something that was critical and that was important, and the doctors who dealt with children knew that. And that's where the journey starts. And of course, Tata Madiba, you know, also in trying to probably pull me out of grief was, so what are we going to do? And truth be told, I really just wanted to renovate a few nice spaces, you know, and create nice spaces for children. But the research was telling us something different. And it was telling us that renovation could be nice, but really, excuse me.
Yeah, that's fine.
What we needed at the time, really what we needed at the time was a center that would focus on children. It was, I don't know how many times I put that on a shelf and said, I can't do this.
Yeah.
It is huge. It is huge. It was daunting. But the more I spoke to the doctors, the more I realized we can't back out. If we don't do it, and we are a children's organization, who's going to do it? So we started, you know, as you know, many of the things that one does is consult.
Yeah.
We consulted with doctors, we consulted with builders, we consulted with child therapists, we consulted. I mean, if I were to write a book just about the consultations and the levels of consultations, and all of them were going towards the same conclusion. A children's hospital, we calculated what it would cost. It would cost us R1 billion to build it and equip it and train staff.
Yeah.
That's a long journey that it took. But eventually we started building when we were at R500 million. And when Tata passed, it also got us a few more huge donations, 100 million donations that enabled us to complete and to complete the project and complete the building thereof of the thing. And now remember, I'm not a doctor. I told you I'm a social worker. Yeah. So I had to manage people whom I didn't know what they were dealing with. They knew better. And what we needed to do as the Children's Fund is to create that environment that would make them deliver better care for children. We created a trust, which you still have, the hospital trust, which I headed for a while, but created the hospital independent of the hospital trust. The fundraising for the hospital is an ongoing challenge. But I think the biggest challenge we faced, not the biggest, but one of the shocking challenges, shocking in the sense that it was unexpected for me, was how civil society struggled to understand, Bongi, have you now really lost it? Why build a children? Why build a hospital? Yes, we must do the research, we must show government. But that was helping me see how we as civil society have shifted ourselves to a point where we given ourselves the right to only be the critics, be the armchair critics, but not get our hands dirty. And if you did, you have the civil society group to try and pull you back in line. But for me, what was important was, if we want to say how government should do things, shouldn't we try? Because this was, when we concluded what it should be, it was going to be a civil society-led public-private partnership. It was not going to leave any child behind because they can't pay. And at the same time, it was going to exploit the best of business, the best of the private, and the best of the public, which is why we asked government for operational funds, which we got. So that project released 600 million that did not exist for children at that time, and that money continues to exist in the budget now. So but that's a long story.
It's a long story, and thank you for doing that. We definitely will request to have you back, because we really haven't begun like the deep conversations that you and I always want to have. For example, your impact and participation in some of the philanthropic institutions like Trust Africa. There was a time when I was at Trust Africa and you were on the board of Trust Africa, but there was a time in which you also kind of, I would say, curated and shaped the direction of the Global Fund for Community Foundations and many others. And so there's still a lot for us to cover. But I want to end by actually thanking you for doing what you are doing, for being that one person. You have held my hand since the time I met you. And I still call on you for so many things. I mean, last year we called on you to come and help us teach and to also take part in some of our new programs, especially our program that we want to start up on women and philanthropy. I know that we still have some work to do with you, especially in getting you to probably even write more and more on some of these experiences, because these are important stories that I think even my colleagues here might know very little about what you are describing, but you have it. So your brain is the cloud. So we need to download that from the cloud. But I want to really thank you. We haven't even gone to talk about your new role at the Barloworld Empowerment Foundation, because I think that again is a different story to talk about. Story. So we would definitely be asking you to come back for another episode where we can take it from where we left it.
Thank you, Bheki, and thank you very much for bringing focus onto this philanthropy. I came and I support you because I believe in what you're doing, and I'll always be supportive of the work you're doing, because you really, I don't know if you realize, because sometimes you don't realize when you're opening a new path, and others will follow, behind you. But personally, with all what I've learned in my experiences, I'm happy to share, so long as it's in support of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think we can't end without mentioning that you've also been recognized internationally and locally. You were awarded the Order of Luthuli, the silver, by the President of South Africa on the 27th of April 2018. I also attended a ceremony where the French government was also giving you an order. So I think your work really speaks for itself, and I really thank you for what you do, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Sibongile Mkhabela, the current director, the Chief Executive Officer of the Barloworld Empowerment Foundation. Thank you for watching.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, talking all things philanthropy.